There's an awful lot to get to, including the great Nigel Farage. I got a lot of emails towards the end of last year saying, come on, mate, you've got to talk longer to him. That's the plan in 2025. Even more, Nigel Farage, the only place you'll see him on Australian TV. The regular appearance is right here on Paul Murray Live. Well done to the cops in Victoria who found a way to stick it to the Victorian acting Premier right in front of him and disrupted his press conference today. We'll explain why in a moment or two's time. And we know what they hid this summer. Despite what they say about the economy, surprise, surprise, the reality is going to be very different. And I'll get to some of those details that they don't want you to know before we are done tonight. We've got a big one ahead. Now, we know the Prime Minister's in a world of pain and he thinks that somehow he's going to be able to spend his way out of trouble. The polls couldn't be clearer. That even in the Turnbull Times, The Guardian, over half of the people who answer their poll say that the country's on the wrong track and that the Prime Minister's disapproval is now in the territory where more people disapprove than approve. Meantime, Newspoll, of course, has rated this Prime Minister as the weakest leader in a decade. There's a lot of chat about Whitlam. Well, let's go back to Rudd Gillard Rudd. He's right back to as bad as that government was, and we all know how they copped it by going into minority in 2010 and then blasted out of government in 2013. So the Prime Minister has a plan, and that plan, of course, is to spend other people's money, otherwise known as, of course, your money. Another example of it today, third day in a row, major announcement, the excuse for a press conference. Of course, it's not just about the local announcement, which local media will pick up on. It's about an opportunity to pretend that's a reason why the Prime Minister needs to be out and about when really he wants to talk about the national issues or just bash away at Peter Dutton. His announcement today was to spend $5 million to help beautify the wonderful South Coast town in New South Wales, Nowra. Why this is exactly the best use of federal taxpayers' dollars, we'll all wait and see. But, oh, that's right, it's in a marginal seat that Labor could well lose because they only won it by about 375 votes last time, and that's when the tide was out on the Liberal Party. If presumably the tide is out on Labor, that Gilmore would be one of the first to fall. We know that there was billions of dollars that were announced yesterday, if you re-elect this government, to be spent on the NBN. And, of course, billions of dollars before that he could have already spent on the Bruce Highway. But no, there's a promise that if you re-elect him, finally I'll do what I haven't done for the past 3 years. But I've got to say, there's always something in each and every one of these announcements that just grinds my gears a little. Because as necessary as some big promises of government are, small amounts of money to just have an excuse to have a press conference is an example of money that I believe could be spent somewhere else. Because in the same way that there is a fire, and I choose that metaphor intentionally, when a fire is burning, you need to put it out. You can then spend money to rebuild or to prevent against another fire, but when people are in the middle of stress, they need emergency support. There are 3 million people who are this close to homelessness. I talk about them every night because they are our fellow Australians, the Australians whom should be receiving maximum support from governments, but they are receiving maximum support right now from charities. The idea that we have food lines in 2025, a quarter of the way into the 21st century, that are as bad as they have been in this century is a disgrace. A disgrace to a government that claims to care about cost of living, claims to care about poor people, but just assumes that somehow they will be able to scare them into voting for them rather than helping them after the next election. And we also learned today about another group of people who are in a world of trouble. And it's the kids of the parents who are in financial trouble. This should be very close to the lead story tonight because it's a statement about the failures of our country. 1 in 3 Australian parents are apparently struggling right now to pay the basic expenses of going to a public school. Now, that news website repeated a press release which came out from an organisation called Act for Kids, and I'm going to read from that now. Research from the National Child Protection Organisation, Act for Kids, has revealed almost 1 in 3 Australians, or 30%, are struggling to pay for their children's basic educational needs. This is things like uniforms, stationery, books, excursions and school fees. We're not talking about the elaborate private school fees. We're talking about the basic things that should be provided, but for some reason you have to pay for to access a system that already you or other members of your family have paid taxes to pay for. The Act for Kids survey of almost 1,000 Australian parents also found that a quarter, or more than a quarter, 27%, are finding it difficult to afford the internet at home. Now, for all the conversation about billions of dollars extra for the NBN, no conversations about it being cheaper or virtually free for people who are in this group. No conversation about that whatsoever. 40% of Aussies say they're battling to pay for extracurricular, you knew I'd fail that one, activities important to their child's social and physical well-being, sport, music, hobbies. Now, we have a Prime Minister who every single day is spending other people's money, often years down the track, never, fingers crossed, because the reality is that the budget is in structural deficit for the next 40 years, meaning that this government has put us in a place where the federal government will spend more than it earns, and it will get worse every year between now and 2060. That's how bad the scenario is going to be. Now, we know that by the years of 2040, 2050 and 2060, the Australian population, which is currently just under 30, will go past 30, past 40 and maybe even on its way towards 50. Double the number of people that are here now, 50 million people. Yet still the government promises to spend more than it earns. The only solution is to increase taxes, and already Australians pay too much tax, as I told you last night. The single greatest source of revenue for this federal government is not the GST, it is not petrol taxes, it is not cigarette taxes, it is not even company tax. It is personal income tax. Yet still, under all of that system, we are in a world of trouble. And we've got $5 million to beautify parts of Nowra. Again, beautiful city, and I'm not going to argue with what obviously has been ticked off as a good idea, but we know why that money is being announced at a prime ministerial level, and it's because it's a seat that if he loses, he gets one seat closer towards what seems to be an inevitable minority government. Or it could be the start of many dominoes to fall, meaning that the minority government won't be formed by the current Prime Minister, but by the alternative Prime Minister in Peter Dutton and the Liberal and National Party. But it is, to me, a disgrace that with all of the money that comes into government, more than ever before, and all of the money that goes out, which is more than ever before, we have a scenario where 1 in 3 parents, and that means kids, 1 in 3 kids, is living in a household that may not be able to pay for their school uniform. Think about how that process, which puts pressure on the start of your life, affects the next stage, and the next stage of your life. The Act for Kids people were on with Chung Lei today here on Sky News.
So if we think about the kinds of things that we need to put into place to make sure kids do a great job at school, then parents are really worried about providing them this year. When parents are really stressed, it passes on to kids who are already a little bit anxious about going to school.
What I find despicable about Anthony Albanese and his government's priorities is that this is a government that, despite the fact that you have seen food lines around the block, 3 million people this close to homelessness, or 1 in 3 families struggling to pay for a school uniform, is that this government has spent more money advertising itself and its political programs than it has given extra funds to things like Food Bank, or the charities, which you may well see the ads on television or hear on the radio, where they want you to sponsor a child here in Australia. Now, I think those charity efforts are spectacular. I do not understand how this government that has billions of dollars for the promises that they want to make to win votes can't find millions of dollars to help the charity sector in Australia. In fact, they have spent 251, how's that, $250 billion since they became the government on government advertising. Government advertising that, of course, way back when was disgraceful, but now it's their turn. They're spending, again, other people's money. This time on hoping that you will fall for their garbage. The federal government spent $251 million on ads last year, according to the Financial Review, fueling criticism from integrity advocates about vote buying as advertising industry players predict a surge in taxpayer-funded campaigns before the election. Figures from the Department of Finance show that ad spending leapt 40% last financial year as the Albanese government outlaid millions of dollars to publicise things like too little too late tax cuts, Medicare urgent care clinics, despite the fact that the amount of people bulk billing is going down, and fee-free TAFE courses that are a great idea, but we are producing fewer apprentices than we were under the previous government. Now, government is about priorities. You cannot spend everything on every good cause, but for goodness sake, if you can spend $250 million selling yourself, you can take half of that money, well, I would suggest all of it, but still, half of that money, and create a scenario where we do not live in a country where 1 in 3 people can't afford to pay for the school uniform of their kid. The flow-on effect of the confidence of that kid is real. No wonder our classrooms remain as disruptive as they are, some of the worst in the OECD, and our academic performance has gone back despite the fact of hundreds of billions of dollars being spent in the education system. If a kid is ashamed of the financial circumstances of which they come, and their parents are doing any and everything they can to stretch what few dollars they have as far as possible, but they still are concerned about where the meals come from, how the medicine gets paid for, or how their kids wear a uniform to school, then we are in the wrong place.